if you have ever actively delayed giving someone tough feedback. When I say tough feedback, constructive feedback, I wouldn't call it criticism, but you want somebody to do better, but you're worried about giving that feedback. And because of that, if you've delayed that feedback, and most often than not, that happens once in a year when you're giving out ratings to your team. If you are one of those person, drop a 1 in the comment, right? Okay, let's see. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your honesty, folks. That really means a lot. So, all right, so let's dive in. And today's session, we will be talking about feedback without anxiety. How do you give really good quality feedback without feeling anxious about it? So, let's dive right in. If you are a quiet, mid-level leader, when I say quiet, I mean introverted leader or not, doesn't matter. But if you're someone who is likes to ruminate within themselves and think a lot before you speak, and if you are someone who avoids giving tough feedback to protect the relationship or save your own social battery, I need to give you a hard truth tonight. Yeah. Avoiding conflict doesn't make you a nice boss. By the way, there is a big difference between being nice and being kind. In fact, I think one of the days I'll make a video on that. Maybe I'll start with a post, text post on LinkedIn, and then I will make a video, live video maybe, on this topic about what it means for you to be a kind leader versus the nice leader. And being nice is not a good thing, right? Being kind is a good thing, and there's a huge difference between them. So, avoiding conflict, and when I say conflict, it most likely than not, as a leader and with your relationship in your team, most likely than not, in fact, almost always, it's going to be about feedback, right? So, if you are avoiding that feedback simply because you don't want to sort of ruffle feathers and don't want to be in that kind of a conversation with your team, and you want to seem nice, you want to be the nice boss, what it does is it makes you a bottleneck. When you tolerate mediocre work to avoid a 10-minute conversation, all you're doing is you're signaling to the senior leadership team, the decision makers, that you cannot handle the emotional weight of being in a senior leadership role, in an executive role. But then here's the thing, you're not alone. Yeah. In fact, there are many of you out there. A recent Harris poll found that 69% of managers are uncomfortable communicating with employees, and nearly 40% are terrified of giving direct feedback. And we hold on to it until the annual review, right? Um, So, what is the danger of this silence, right? First, like I said, 69% of you will avoid this conversation, right? And then 50%, 57% of the employees, on the other hand, prefer corrective feedback. They want the constructive feedback. And to test this out amongst yourself, all of you who is listening and watching me now, right? Wouldn't you like to have those constructive feedback so that you can improve yourself, right? So if you feel that way, I'm sure most of your employees feel that way too. So they, like I said, 57% of the employees actually prefer a corrective feedback over praise. They prioritize feedback over praise. Your silence is stunting their career, and that's how they think about it, and it's ruining, on top of it, right? It's ruining your promotion chances. So tonight, I'm going to give you 3 shifts to handle conflict effortlessly, emotionlessly, and in a way that proves you are ready for the director or a VP or a senior level role, whatever that might be in your organization. So grab a pen and take down notes, or if you are someone who likes to take digital notes, then feel free to do that. So, first things first, let me tell you that avoiding a conflict or a difficult message to your team doesn't make you empathetic. It makes you a bottleneck, like I said, right? So let's move on, and I'll be talking about three shifts today. Yeah. So the first one, I call it attack versus alignment, right? So this is the difference between you feeling like you're attacking somebody versus actual alignment with your team, right? And then we'll talk about the three sentence micro correction. Yeah, we'll get to the points in detail as we go through these each one of these shifts. And then the final one that I'll talk about is the upward pushback, and this is something that I've got as a request. Like, a lot of the times I talk about how to manage a team, but a lot of you, when it comes to career, you struggle to manage upward. And truly, the word manage is not the right word, to be honest. In my opinion, it should be leading upward. Your leaders are looking forward for leaders as well. Your manager is looking for someone to lead them from the team as well. So you can be that person. So leading upward is another topic that we will discuss, and how to push back, right? How to manage requests that is not practical. So that's what we will be talking about. So let's move on to the first shift. Uh, it's called attack versus alignment. The reason giving feedback drains your energy, drains your battery, is because it feels personal. And in behavioral science, this is called effective conflict. Yeah, conflict based on personality. When you tell someone or give someone a feedback, like, for example, you are disorganized, right? If that is the feedback, you trigger a fight or flight response in their brain. They stop listening and start defending. Think about it from your own point of view, right? You will feel like you want to defend, even if it is coming from a good place. You will try and defend yourself. So, shift number one is moving from the attack, which is where you feel like you have to defend yourself, to alignment. How do you put a statement or a feedback that is in alignment with who they are and what they really want to do? Now, senior leaders or executives, right, they use cognitive conflict, which is quite opposite to the affective conflict. Now, what is cognitive conflict? Is basically conflict based on the task. And this is a roundabout way of saying what I'm going to say now, right? But, and give you this with an example, a real life case study of what happened, right? And I'm going to give you three examples for each one of those different points that I was speaking about. Now, first one is, I will call this person Marcus. Of course, I'm making up the name because I want to keep the privacy of that person, right? So this person was managing engineering operations for an organization, and he had one of the developers constantly delivering late the codes that they were producing, right? The programs that they were producing. This person in Marcus's team was delivering it late almost consistently. Now, there are two ways to look at this, right? Marcus you would usually go up to that person and say, "Oh, you're not organized properly, or you are not on time," right? Instead of that, feels like an attack. Now, instead of attacking that developer's time management skill, I taught Marcus a different way of handling it, because the problem may not be that developer. It is, well, it's what the developer is doing that is the problem, right? The delay is the problem, not the developer themselves, and you need to address it that way. So instead of attacking the developer's time management, Marcus sat down one day and he said something like this, right? The current pacing of your sprint is putting our Q3 product launch at risk. How do we close the gap between your current output and the target? That's it, right? See, what I've done there is that I've removed the developer as a person, as who that person is. I've kept it aside. So that's effective, uh, you know, conflict. To cognitive conflict, where I'm not talking about the developer, I'm talking about delivery timelines of the developer, right? So what Marcus has done in stating that is he removed the emotion. It became a shared puzzle to solve, right? It's not your problem. It's our problem, and how do we solve this problem? The developer didn't get defensive in this case, right? He actually suggested a workflow change that helped all the developers in that team. Now, that is what I call alignment. Now, type align in the chat if you see how powerful it is to fight the problem together instead of fighting the person, right? Now, that is executive maturity. That's how you become a strategic leader, right? So, let's summarize what we've done here. Stop triggering effective conflict. That's when you become personal, right? Start using cognitive conflict, which is basically you, instead of attacking the person, you are looking at the task that was the cause of the problem, right? And now the rule is, don't fight the person, fight the problem together, right? Make it our problem instead of you as a problem. Yeah. So that's shift number one. Let's move on to shift number two. And I call this the 3 sentence micro correction. So, what is 3 sentence micro correction? Now, before we get on to that, if you are getting value tonight, hit the like button to so that it reaches more people on the feed, right? It reaches them on the feed, and start interacting on the comment section. Put in comments on the what that you have. Like I said, if you resonate with this, type resonate on the chat. Yeah, and if you're getting value from this conversation today, please type in the value on the chat. So now let's move on to shift number two. So I was talking about the 3 sentence micro correction. What is it, right? Now, quiet leaders or introverted leaders, and factors that in this case, it doesn't matter whether you're a quiet leader, extroverted, right? If you're a leader who hates feedback because they imagine a grueling 45 minutes emotionally charged showdown, right? Most of you feel that, right? When you have to give the feedback, the tough conversation, it will feel like it's going to drain the emotions because it's emotionally charged conversation. But the factor is that feedback shouldn't be an event. Now that's how you look at it. It's an event. It's like a whole event with emotional showdown between two people. And it shouldn't be that. It should instead, I will say that it should be a reflex. It should be an automatic reflex. And I'm not saying you need to react. You need to respond. And how do you do that? Now that's what top executives and great leaders do. And I have given it a my I have my own model to do that. I call it the SBI model, right? So I'll talk about what SBI stands for. First one, S stands for situation, right? And then B in SBI stands for behavior, and then I stands for impact, right? So we will talk about situation, behavior, and impact. How can this model help you get into that conversation more comfortably and turn this into a reflex instead of you having to sort of manage somebody's emotion? First, like I said, the first shift is to talk about the problem rather than the person, right? So I'll tell you, give you this, explain this SBI model with an example. I'll talk about another leader that I was working with. I'll give her the name Chloe. Like Chloe, a marketing director, had a direct report who constantly interrupted others in a team meeting. Keeps interrupting people. So what did Chloe do? Right? When she started working with me, and she brought this issue up with me, I said, it's simple. And I gave her the playbook on this, right? I told her about the SBI method. So instead of scheduling a heavy, um, very targeted one-on-one session that would have drained her energy, she basically set up a quick catch up, basically pulled him aside and for a 60-second conversation. Because remember, feedback is most effective when it is immediate. So what she did was, as soon as she came out of the meeting room, she basically asked him to come aside and said she wants to have a quick conversation. She used 3 sentences, and that's it. Very short, sweet, right? She used the 3 sentences, and 3 sentences were around situation, behavior, and impact. So I'll tell you what exactly she said, right? Situation. First one. So she said, during the client sync up meeting this morning, so that situation, right? Behavior, she said, you spoke over Sarah twice while she was presenting. That's the behavior. She addressed the behavior there. And then impact. What did she say? Is when that happens, it makes our team look misaligned and we lose the client's trust, right? That's the impact. So what she brought up was the situation. What was the situation during the meeting, right? And she spoke about behavior. You spoke over Sarah, and then impact, which makes us look misaligned in front of the client's eyes. That means lesser trust on us. And then she asked him, and this is where the power is, right? How can we ensure everyone gets the floor next time? That's it. And then she handed over the microphone to this person and expected an answer from that person. So the fact is that the three sentences is it's all pure data, right? The behavior stopped immediately in this case. This person realized that he was disrupting unnecessarily. There wasn't really a point. Wanted to come across as someone who's very active, but realize that that doesn't align very well with the rest of the team members and his boss. So let me know in the chat, right? Are you hoarding feedback for media review or the year end review in some cases, even worse, right? You hold on to giving that feedback until the year end review because you really don't have a choice. You have to give out a rating, performance rating, and you have to justify that, and that's the only time you give the feedback. If that's you, be honest, it's absolutely fine, because most people do. Like I said, according to a study, about 67% of the managers, and those are the ones that were honest, right? I'm pretty sure that number is much higher. So let me tell you this: if you are one of those person, it is time to start using micro corrections. SBI model. I hope you're taking down notes and it is helping you. And again, once more, I'll ask you, if any of you find this useful, please mention it on the chat saying that that was useful. If it resonates with you, let me know on the chat. Type resonate on the chat. Yeah. So as of now, I'm looking at the chat. Oh, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you. I understand that you are jumping in and out of the session. That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for being on the chat and putting in, I can call out your name as well. Okay, so let's move on. So what are we moving on to? We are moving on to the shift number 3. This is one of the most requested points. Yeah, many of you have talked about, asked me, a lot of the times I'm sharing how you can manage your team, what are the right ways to do it, even the feedback. Now I'll tell you how you can give feedback to your manager. How do you push upward? And again, this is a very situational one that I'm going to talk about, but if you're interested in a much more detailed way of giving feedback upward, just let me know on the chat. I'll maybe create a new video altogether, because that's an entirely different way of managing your okay, sorry, not managing, leading your manager, right? So let's go on to shift number 3. This brings up to a very important point, and this is where promotions are won or lost. The upward pushback, the ultimate test of your executive presence, isn't how you manage down, which is it's a skill that you need. But if you want to get promoted, if you want to grow in your career, it is about how you lead upward, right? It's about how you lead up. And we often say yes to impossible deadlines from our managers, senior executives, especially if it comes directly from them, a VP or a senior director, a global director, because we hate friction. We don't want to be in that. Nobody likes it. Whether you are an introvert or extrovert, doesn't matter. We don't want that friction. But the fact is, a good leader will despise a yes man, right? They'll despise a yes person. Let's be neutral on that, right? Let me move on to the next point here. So stop saying yes to impossible deadlines. If you know that a deadline is going to be impossible for you to meet, don't say yes and stretch yourself thin simply because you want to create an impression or you want to avoid that friction altogether. because a good leader will always respect leaders who push back but strategically. There is a way to do that. You just don't say no and expect to that to be accepted by your leader, right? So I'll give you another example, and I'll talk about Javier. Right? I'm making up the name again to keep privacy, and Javier is a senior director. Yeah, and sorry, he was a director and reporting to a senior director. Uh, and he had his senior director come up to Javier one day and dropped a massive project on him, and it was like over a weekend, close to a weekend. I think on say it was a Thursday, right? And the expectation was that Javier finishes all of that by Monday. So yeah, given on a Thursday, finish it on a Monday, and it's a heavy work that Javier had to do. So what did Javier do? Javier didn't complain. He used the upward pushback method that I'm going to talk to you about. So when that email came to him, Javier responded calmly and peacefully without being flustered. He replied with something like this, right? So he said something like, I completely understand the priority of this initiative. To deliver this by Monday at the quality you expect and I want myself to deliver, I will need to pause the current software migration until Wednesday. Do I have your alignment on that strategic trade off? That's all, right? This is a clear, very absolute message on that. If you notice, Javier didn't say no. What he did was he forced his manager to make an executive decision about resourcing within his team. Javier earned a seat at the strategic table in this sense, right? In fact, what that's exactly what happened. Javier was seen by his manager as someone who was very strategic, because what happened in this case was the manager was just reminded about the other project. So he did was he basically said, okay, we'll deprioritize the other project. Thanks for bringing it up to me. And he thought, and the kind of impression Javier created here was that he came across as a thought leader, a business owner, instead of just another worker, another leader who's just following orders, right? Now, who here struggles to say no to their bosses? Whoever is watching me live now, if you are there and if you struggle to say no to your manager, right? Just say struggle on the chat, right? Type me on the chat if you have to. You have to stop acting like an employee, guys, right? And start acting like strategic partners. And that's where everything shifts, right? So, just as a recap, executives remember, or good leaders respect resource management and not yes men or yes persons, right? Whoever's, they just don't want always people in their teams to say yes, right? They will respect if you put it strategically, right? Second one, force a strategic trade-off. When you put in that message, push back, put in a strategic trade-off. Give them a clear choice, a binary choice. Should I do this or that? And that helps them a lot, right? So you are leading upward. You are being a leader to your manager, and that's an important skill. And let's move on. So I would like to now talk about the 60-day leadership challenge. I call it the leaderathon, right? So I spoke about Marcus, Chloe, and Javier, right? If you notice, none of them, all of them, just didn't survive an uncomfortable conversation. They used that uncomfortable situation, a conflict situation, to prove their executive maturity. Knowing the psychology behind these frameworks is great. It's amazing, right? Now you know what to do about it. But having the reflex to execute them in a live, in a tense boardroom or a high stake meeting situation when your heart is beating fast and you still bring that reflex on, that is what separates a regular mid-level manager to a senior leader like a director, global director, VP, or CEO, CFO, right? If you are tired of biting your tongue, absorbing your team's stress, and just watching louder colleagues get promoted over you, it is time to upgrade your operating system. And that is why I've created the 60-day leadership challenge, right? This is a rigorous step-by-step sprint. We don't just talk about theory here, right? I give you exact scripts. I give you scripts that is very bespoke to you using AI prompts. So in every lesson that I have there is an activity that you will be required to do, right? Including managing up or leading up and pushback and building an undeniable executive brand without changing who you really are. Whether you are an introvert, extrovert, does not matter. These are systems that you can apply in pretty much any situation if you want to grow in your career. And I'm dropping the link in the chat right now if I could. Uh, and just so you know, right? This is a fully engaging 60-day challenge, right? I call it, like I said, the leader-a-thon. Feel free to get in there and enroll yourself. And if you're feeling stagnated, this is the time you actually have an opportunity to do something about it. Stop blaming the culture. You have a toxic boss, or the organization doesn't support your growth. Your manager doesn't support your growth. All of those are for weak people who blame the outward world. You don't want to be that person. You want to take charge. Instead of questioning why is it happening to me, ask the question, what can I do about it? So I've dropped the link on the chat. I hope you will enroll yourself in it. Click on that link, secure your spot in the challenge, and stop letting uncomfortable conversations like we spoke about right now stall your career. Let's go to work, right, and get things done. All right. So we have some time left. I want to answer your specific question if you have any. If you have a difficult dynamic with your direct manager or your reportees or anyone, a key stakeholder that you work with, drop your question in the chat and I'll try and address those questions. Yeah. So um, yeah, conflict is necessary. Yeah, but too much conflict, of course. Now, the idea behind it is not about not having conflicts at all or to have too many conflicts. It's about how do you turn a conflicting situation in your mind into something that could turn you looking like an executive, right? How do you take an adverse situation and turn that around to your advantage? And that's what this is about. And in fact, I tell a lot of people that in your team, if you're running team meetings and if you're a manager, a leader, if you're not running meetings, you are doing something wrong. You have to have team meetings at least once a week. In these team meetings, when you're bringing up new points, you should appoint one person. You should literally ask one person in your team to take on the role of being the devil's advocate, right? This person's job, and throughout that meeting, and you can have different people, different person in your team to take that role every week, right? You, all that person has to do is to put a counterpoint. Just say that, oh, I don't think that'll work. Why? And of course with really good reasons behind it, not to for the sake of it, but their job is to bring in a conflicting point. And the whole idea is so that one, you avoid having yes men or yes persons in your team first. Second, it brings in a new perspective to something that your team and you yourself might be so accustomed to doing, right? So a conflicting observation or opinion could change the dynamic entirely, right? So that will help the team grow faster, and in fact it brings up the culture of openness. People will not be scared. You bring that safety within the team to let everybody know that it is okay to bring in a conflicting, I spoke a lot about this, but so yeah, opinion, right? So that's what makes the difference. So you want to invite that kind of opposition within your team without being rude. You set the rules around it, but then you do that, right? So yeah, let me see if there are any other questions. I don't see any other questions, but thank you all for bringing in. Okay, Michael, you got another question. Beneficial to someone, do you think these lessons would be beneficial to someone who somehow stumbles into executive roles at a young age? I only got a couple of years of entry to mid-level. Absolutely. I think this up now I specifically call out mid-level leaders, but that's because majority of people who feel stuck, I call it the mid grind, right? Chaos in the middle, right? Because this addresses a lot of the problems. that mid-level leaders face, because a lot of the stagnation comes in at that level. But this applies if you are aspiring to be a leader, if you are a new leader who's just take on the first level manager role, a team leader role, right? Or if you are a senior executive. In fact, a lot of my clients who have one-on-one conversations with me are senior leaders, and a lot of the times I have understood that even with the vintage and the experience a lot of these senior leaders have, they struggle with a lot of these things on a day-to-day basis, not because they're not great leaders, they are good leaders. It's just that sometimes, we are emotional beings, and it sometimes takes over, and we struggle to think through those situations that's not naturally happening to us every day. And these situations can really challenge no matter who the leader is, even if you are a CEO of a large company, right? And in this day and age, there are CEOs very, very young. So yeah, this applies for pretty much anybody in the leadership role. And in fact, I would go ahead and say that this is something that you can apply in your life, right? If conflicting situation, you want to give a good feedback to your wife about the cooking, there's a way to do that. You just don't say it's bad, right? There is a way to do that. So you look for a win-win in that situation, and it's about how your reflexes are built. And it's not about learning this on this one video or live stream. It's not about that. It's more about how do you get that soaked into you as a person, right? So yeah, the link is on the chat. I'll post that again here just so you have it. I don't know if that messages are going out. Maybe there are issues with the chat leaving while I'm streaming, but it will be there. If not now, it's gonna come up. Yeah, cool. And I've got in total, I've got quite a few people on the LinkedIn. I don't see any chat. There are 32 people on LinkedIn, one in YouTube. I don't see any other questions, but if there are, keep let that flow through the comments. I will read every single one of them. If there is a topic that I feel like that's a good topic for us to bring up for our next week's live conversation, I will bring that up. Uh, Thank you all so very much, and I hope you have a great